Today I would like to talk mostly about trust and universities and different aspects of that trustworthiness. I would like to start with trustworthiness of universities and the relationship between trust and the institutional autonomy of the universities. In our countries, levels of institutional trust are remarkably low. Citizens have grown very skeptical towards politics, business, and even the media, yet universities remain a notable exception. They continue to be among the few institutions that people still trust, and I think that that's fascinating given that we are here. For a university like ours, one that values liberal thought, pluralism, and open dialogue, this trust is both a privilege and a responsibility. It raises profound questions about the role we should play in sustaining democratic life, how to foster trust not only in knowledge but in everything that we do, how to cultivate empathy across social and ideological divides, and how to help rebuild the moral foundations of public life. However, the question is why universities are trustworthy. Perhaps it has something to do with the perception that universities still operate according to values that feel authentic, a commitment to truth, open inquiry, and public service. I would like to know if you agree with that. And I would also like to know about whether you think that this trustworthiness is fragile and what does depend on.
Sorry for not speaking Spanish. I had some Spanish 35 years ago in school, so I can follow some of what you say, but I better not speak Spanish myself right now. So, just a word on context. Most, in fact, all Swiss universities are public universities. There are 12, depending on how you count, and you have 2 federal universities, and then all other universities are cantonal. You know, Swiss has cantons, as they say, regional universities. So there is, they're more or less tax money funded. And this in itself, of course, creates a certain responsibility, as you said, to use that money responsibly. Nevertheless, so in general, this is the situation, just as background. And you're right, in general, the situation in Switzerland and in Germany, I should say, I'm German, I'm now Swiss and German, I have German nationality, I come from Hamburg in the north of Germany. The situation is similar. Trust rates are pretty low for politics, for the banks, for the church, because of many scandals there. But the universities fare still better. So it's the same as here. And it's an interesting question why that is so. And I think you mentioned some of the factors that universities try to stay somewhat away from political debates, because we're not a parliament, we're not a marketplace, we are a research institution and a teaching institution, and we have these obligations, and we may teach about all kinds of topics. We may teach about politics. Of course, we have politics as a discipline, political science, so that's totally okay. But the approach of the university as a research institution, I'd say by and large is not fully neutral. We can discuss that, but it's not as biased as a political approach outside university has to be. I mean, it's part of the business of doing politics. Or an economic institution has, of course, biased interests. It wants to make profit, let's say, or be profitable. So in that sense, people seem to understand, or people still seem to think that the university is somewhat more neutral or above certain conflicts that rage within our societies. And maybe they're lucky. But it's fragile, you said so. The Corona crisis has been quite a hit for universities, or a blow, maybe is the better word, because in Switzerland and also in Germany, there was quite a lot of skepticism. All of a sudden, there was quite a lot of skepticism concerning, let's say, the vaccination question. I assume it's been the same here, that some segments of the population didn't want to get vaccinated. And then all of a sudden you notice that this goes back to skepticism about science. It's not just, I don't want my kids or myself to be vaccinated against the coronavirus, but I don't trust science. So even though numbers are good, there was a discussion during the crisis and afterward that made the universities rethink their situation. So nowadays, I think we are much more sensible or sensitized to the potential of distrust in the public, even concerning universities. So we should not just be safe in our chairs and enjoy the good statistics or the good, opinion of the university. We have to work on our reputation, and I think what Corona has shown, and also other crises like climate change. I mean, it's a massive topic, as we all know, but we also know that there are quite a lot of politicians, not just Trump, who is the most obvious case, who deny the existence of climate change. You know that. And there are people also in Switzerland or in Germany or in Europe who don't really want to follow what we seem to know, namely that it's a real thing and that we have to do something about it, who prefer not to really accept scientific knowledge. And why is that so? That's the second argument I would want to make. It is because some of the results of our research, or of climate science research for that matter, quite strongly indicates that we have to change at least some of our ways of living, right? And not many people are ready for that, want it. So that's a second reason why some people, even well-minded people, not always like, let's say, the results of our research. So I think that's another threat. It's not just the people who are fully skeptical of what we do, but it's also people who might, in principle, not be so skeptical, but who, for various reasons, don't like the results because they think that the results as presented by science lead to certain political measures that might indicate a strong need to transform societies. And that there are some people more open to that and some people not so open to that. So it's a difficult situation, and we have to, as universities, we have to be aware of this, of this context within which we work.
In terms of the corona crisis that you mentioned, I think that some people were skeptical because they didn't want to change their way of life, as you said, but they also sometimes they think that all of the results in terms of science, or some of the results, are backed or are paid by the pharmaceuticals or that. And that, I think, it's a threat to the autonomy of the universities, because at the end people think that that universities are not as autonomous as they should be, or as they think previously that they were. What do you think about it? And I would like to, so you think that autonomy is a precondition to trust in universities, or is a consequence, in the sense that
Well, in official terms, it's a precondition. Like my university also is autonomous in legal terms. It's not just another branch of local government, say. It is treated in legal terms as an autonomous institution with the right to do its own research, to make its own decisions, and to hire people according to our standards, etc., etc. So in that sense, it is, legally speaking, autonomous. And I think we should definitely keep it that way, because, as you indicated, that is part of what makes us a little more attractive in terms of trust. That we stand aloof, not fully, as I mentioned, but of some of the heated debates that we find in society at large. So we have to defend it, and there are various attacks on the autonomy of universities. One is the economic attack, if you want. This may be strange to say in a private university. I learned that your university is a fully private university. That's why I mentioned that my university is a public university, with most of its income coming from the state or the canton, as I said. But still, some people in politics favor a privatized model of the university, and would like more funding to come from, let's say, business or industries, or even private sponsors. So I have a a fundraiser in my university, because the money we get from the state isn't really enough for all our projects, or if we want to improve, let's say, in various respects, sometimes we need money beyond the money we get from the public. So that is something we have to be aware of. If we accept that money, this might have an impact, as you suggest, on the trust, because then people think, oh, this is sponsored by, in our case, not really pharmaceutical industry, because we don't have, we have medicine, but we're not so, we are more a humanities university. Most of our research is within the humanities or the human sciences. But this is a risk that we have to be aware of. And what we do is, when we accept this kind of money, it's clear and it's a precondition. It has to be on our terms. So whoever offers a certain amount of money cannot, for example, say, well, you better hire this person, or you better treat this topic or that topic. We have to be autonomous in this sense to set, to set the frame. And so this is important. And if we don't do that, we clearly risk the trust that we still enjoy. Because then, as you say, people think, oh, well, this is just biased research. It's been funded by this person or that company, and that's always a risk. So this is not an easy terrain, if you want, because, as I said, to some extent we accept this kind of money, but at the same time we have to be very, very careful in how we handle it and how we communicate how we handle it. There's a lot of communication involved in this, and this is something that we need to do to keep up the trust.
I would like to turn to a more personal dimension of trust now, the role of the professor. Here we have some of our teachers, the classroom. And when we talk about trust in universities, we often think as the institution as a whole. But in reality, trust is built or lost within the classroom through the daily relationship between professors and students. And the professor embodies in a very tangible way the values of intellectual honesty, openness, the respect of truth, etc. So in a times when students are increasingly skeptical of authority, and where information or misinformation is everywhere, I think the credibility of the individual teacher becomes more important. It's crucial in this sense. The classroom might be one of the last spaces where trust can still be practiced, if we can say so. I mean, it may be, it's not where it can still, or it may be practiced, not as an abstract value, but just as a lived experience. And so, from your perspective, what makes a professor trustworthy today? Is it still primarily about intellectual authority, or has it become more about empathy or authenticity or the ability to engage in dialogue with students?
It's mostly informal. Most of the things that you mentioned, you cannot formalize or legalize or put into legal terms. Trust, in my last book that was published in German, I call an invisible force, which means that it's all in the personal or more personal dimensions of interaction that you just mentioned. So it depends on character, on the way you treat other people, on the way you respect other people or disrespect them. So as a professor, I would say, and this is true for all of trust, before students trust you, you have to trust them. It's not just a one-sided affair. It's a bidirectional affair. So I think you have to take students seriously. You have to try to understand where they're coming from. You have to strengthen them in their argumentation, in their capacity to argue. That's what we are supposed to teach them. And but it's not just me being upfront and telling students this or that, and then they follow it blindly. But it has to be a dialogue. So, like my teaching, I do still a little teaching, even as president. I try to be I try to be very communicative and not just do what we call it in German confrontational teaching, because you stand up front and confront students, bit of like here. So I would, in a similar situation, I would ask questions and it would be dialogue. Yeah, that's important. But you also have you need to tell students if their argument goes in wrong ways. So you don't need to be afraid of that. You have to, of course, in the classroom you have freedom of expression, but still it's not the same kind of freedom that you have outside university, because we have a mission, namely truth, let's say, or progress in research, progress in knowledge. So in that sense, I think you are allowed as a teacher sometimes to intervene and say, well, this is not a very good argument, or you're straying too far apart from our topic. If I have a discussion on, I don't know, on Heidegger, and someone just wants to talk about football, I will correct the person and say, this is not what we're doing here. Please get back to the topic. So he's free to say what he wants to say, but we have a mission, a collective mission, a mutual mission, and this is something I have to be willing as a professor to do. Apart from that, it's all the things that you mentioned. It's integrity, it's sincerity, it's perhaps to some extent authenticity. There are limits to that, but that students have the idea that you really believe in what you teach and what you say, and that you're also willing to admit your own limitations. No professor is a wise God. We have I'm afraid to say we have our limitations even as professors. Don't tell anybody, but of course we don't know everything, right? And it's important to say that and to share and not be afraid of doing that. So in that sense, all of this I think creates an atmosphere of trust. Don't abuse your power. Don't abuse the power you have, because you're great students, right? You have power. Don't deny it, it's there. But try to be careful about handling it. And I think it's important never to abuse it, never to intimidate students or to make them feel ashamed. Last thing, I find this very important in my classes. There are always some students who don't like to talk, who are too timid, too shy. That's fine. I wasn't always talkative as I'm now. I was very, very shy as a student. Really, I never said anything. I was just afraid to talk in public, I have to say. So I think it's also important to create an atmosphere in which even these kinds of timid persons have the strength and develop the strength to say something, to speak up and articulate themselves, because I know that everybody follows you and reflects on the things you discuss in class, but it's difficult to share if someone doesn't speak. So it's a mixture of things, it's not just one thing. And what makes it difficult, I think, to receive this kind of trust is, as I said, you cannot teach becoming trustworthy. There's no course on how to become trustworthy as professor. I think there's no course. Maybe there is, but I haven't come across it, and I think it wouldn't make sense. But this makes it difficult because even for the university, what this means is that it depends to some extent on your personality. And where does the personality come from? It comes from your upbringing, your family, your parents, your friends, your peer group, all of that. And that's something that's difficult to steer. To some extent, the university has to, in recruiting professors, I think, has to pay a lot of attention to personality, even though sometimes the procedures don't allow for that or make it easy to pretend, right? So it's quite complex, and it depends a bit on individual characteristics of persons, which sometimes you're lucky enough to have these persons, to hire these persons. Sometimes it doesn't happen, and then there's a certain problem.
Wow, it's very challenging what you said, because on the one side, we need professors to be trustworthy, but you said that you cannot teach them to be trustworthy. And so it's a challenge for us, for universities, to do that.
How old was I when I turned professor? I think 42. I guess, I don't know if that's an average age here for becoming professor. It's pretty average in Germany and Switzerland. But by that, 42 is pretty mature, I guess. So you are mostly formed as a person by then. Yeah, it's not that at age 42 you really change dramatically as character. Maybe when you're younger, you're more malleable, more flexible in changing your ways. But that's not something that usually happens. So that's why it's so tricky for universities in all these recruitment processes to really find out what kind of person is this really beyond what this person shows us in this person's presentation or in the talks. And it's really difficult. I don't know if sometimes we work with external agencies because they do some kind of an assessment center. We're not really good at that, at least in my university, which means additional sort of ways to get to know a person, and it's helpful, but it's also costly. I have to say, it's not for nothing. So, but I think it's certainly with the leading personnel, it's worthwhile doing it. But it can go wrong. I mean.
Yeah. It's difficult, but it's a challenge because at the end you want universities to be trustworthy. That requires professors to be trustworthy. But at the end, what you are saying is that you need the background. I mean, that person has to be trustworthy before getting into the university, and that it's a societal challenge. Yeah. So it's. Sure. It's very. I think it's very interesting. But you said something that you said that if you want to be trustworthy, then you have to trust your students, yes. Which I think it's very important. But in that, I want to talk about that trust and the paradox between trust and control. Mm-hmm. Today, we are people usually say that they want to rebuild trust. We want to trust the students. We want the students to trust their teachers. Yet the response to the uncertainty is often more control. To add more rules, more oversight, more screening, more everything. And we have that similar tension in academia. I think you have the same. On the one hand, we want to foster a culture of trust, yes. Of intellectual honesty and autonomy, but at the same time, the rise of generative artificial intelligence, AI, yeah. And the growing concerns about academic integrity are leading us to introduce a lot of controls. So it raises a difficult question. Can we really build that trust in an environment that increasingly it's relying on control and it seems to be so threatened?
That's a very good question, because this is the reality of our institutions. Every university in Switzerland has to be accredited by some external agency that is funded by the federal government, in fact. So we put in, and I'm not sure if it's the same here, but we put in a lot of energy in getting accredited every, I think, 6 or 7 years. Yeah, it's a massive investment we have to make to get accreditation, to be accepted as university with the right, let's say, to grant PhDs, for example. So it's a lot of bureaucracy, it's a lot of personal energy by my colleagues, by my employees. And sometimes you wonder, because what is this process about? It's about control. It's about an external view, wanting certain numbers, yeah, wanting statistics, wanting good things like do you care about discrimination at university? Do you have places where people can go if they feel discriminated against, which is good to have. You have to prove all of that, but that's it's a lot of work and it eats up a lot of our energy, and it creates its own costs. And it's interesting that before this kind of process was implemented, universities still had some leverage in being more autonomous even there, and in setting up their own internal control mechanisms. And one of the things that this external agency in our last round of accreditation told us was, well, it's nice if you have this internal system, but we don't really trust it. It may be biased because it's too personal at some point, yeah, because people know each other maybe. So we have to drop that kind of trust, and we need external supervision, yeah. So that's, as you said, it's an introduction of distrust into the system. And it's interesting that for us, I think, as university, we are in between these two poles, wanting to create an atmosphere that is more of an informal kind and that I just described earlier on, at the same time being confronted with this desire by society or by politics to have more control mechanisms involved. I think we have to face that, and we don't, it's there. It won't go away just because we want it to go away, but we still have some maneuver, hopefully, some space for movement there to implement some of these regulations in our own way, because again, and I repeat myself, I think even if you have all these regulations implemented, at the end of the day, how they are implemented, how the strictest rules are implemented, depends on persons. And then trust enters the scene again, as we said before. So you don't get rid of trust. Even if you have full control or try to establish full control, it's an illusion. There cannot be full control. What is trust? Trust means to let go control to some extent. We all understand what this means in private, right? If you trust your partner or your friend, you grant this person, as we say in philosophy, discretionary space. So this person, you don't control this person. You don't follow this person. You don't check this person on your smartphone. Where is she? Where's he? What's he doing? What's she doing? Yeah, this is not trust. This is distrust, right? So in trust, you let someone go. You let a person free to some extent. So and that's what creates the risk of trust. And it seems to me that our institutions are torn between the desire for control and the desire for replacing trust, at the same time wanting trust. So it's quite an ambivalent situation right now. I don't have the perfect solution here, the perfect answer, but I think we should at least accept that the desire to control everything has its limits. I was invited, when I wrote on trust, this book on trust, it was a bit for a larger public. I have a very philosophical book on trust and a more popular book. So I was invited in political contexts or in some institutional contexts that are highly regulated. And I was wondering, why do these people invite me? They have all their regulation. Let's say when it comes to nuclear safety, or the tax system in Switzerland is quite strictly regulated. There is a regulation for everything almost. Like, why do they want to hear about trust? I never understood. So I go there, I give my lecture. I say, why do you want me to lecture? You don't have a trust problem. Everything is in control. It seems. Yeah, you have your regulations, you have your legal regulations, etc. And then people keep telling me, well, that's fine, but that's just, as I said, it's just one aspect of it. But every regulation needs a person to implement it, to live with it, to communicate it, and then trust always enters the scene again, even if maybe some officials don't want it to be there because they want to be in control. So I think there's a certain paradox. The more you want to regulate, the more you realize at some point that you can't, and that trust doesn't go away. The need for trust doesn't go away. It's, I think, true for almost any institution.
And how that because what you said, it's at the institutional level. But what about academic integrity between teachers and students? Is it possible to balance this tension between maintaining academic integrity without undermining the trust that makes the learning process genuine? Or the more we control students, the less we trust them. But we have this threat from the Gen AI, and professors are concerned that students use ChatGPT to. So how can we balance this tension?
I don't know. Now, because we have the same problem. Students, in Lucerne, for example, maybe it's the same here. You acquire credits through being present in a seminar room and being present on a regular basis, attendance, and sometimes you have to work on an essay. You have to write an essay, let's say. And in the past, we then graded the essay. In philosophy, it's true for all disciplines, I guess. We try to evaluate the quality of the essay. Nowadays, as you all know, some of you, only very few, use AI in writing their essays. So what do? I would like to hear from you. What do you want us to do? It's difficult, isn't it? Because how do I judge ChatGPT, its quality as professor, when what matters in the course is, did you understand, let's say, Plato's political philosophy? Did you understand it? Not AI. I'm not interested in AI's understanding. So I think we are all in a situation where it has become completely unclear how we deal with this in terms of our main business, grading and evaluating students' intellectual capacities. I don't think that we have yet found a good solution. Interestingly, in my situation, what we sometimes do is we go back to oral exams. Yeah? So instead of having written essays, we go back to oral exams, which is strange because you have this hyper-modernized AI, and then at the same time you go back to very old and almost ancient ways of testing students. But that then again brings trust to the fore once more, because of course oral exams to some extent are better if there is a trustworthy relationship between two sides, between the parties involved, and maybe it helps to regain trust in students, because that it allows me to better follow your students, to be nearer your intellectual capacities than the written exams. I'm very sad about this. I have to say I'm a book person. I'm old school, I admit. I went to the library just now here, and we were talking about this. And you have all the books, but students don't have books on their tables. They all have computers on their tables and iPads and stuff. And I'm old enough to be a bit melancholic about that, because I love books. It's important to have books, to buy books, to read books. It's a different kind of work. I'm now sorry about this. You don't want to hear this, but I think it's a different intellectual experience to read a book and to work with it and to underline things. I know you can do that on an iPad as well. I know it's all there. But I wonder, my impression is that to some point, the focus of students is easier diverted nowadays with these new technologies. So again, that makes it so difficult sometimes to create a fair judgments concerning capacities, intellectual capacities, and I'm not sure. I would so far I would distrust some of AI, but I mean this has no meaning at all, because it's there and will certainly evolve further. It will become even more important. We all know this, I guess. Then let's at least try to not be controlled by it. Let's try to control it as much as we can. I mean, my dissertation was on John Dewey, a famous American pragmatist, and he developed an interesting democratic theory, and schools actually play a very important role in his whole approach. And so I think my discipline, for example, should think a lot more about schools and universities and what's going on there. There's not so much research on that in philosophy. It's interesting. But it's necessary, because schools are so important in, as we said at the beginning, in creating, if everything works out well, well-minded and publicly spirited persons that are trustworthy. So I'm not sure about the larger effect of AI on our institutions. I find it threatening, and I wish at least we could at least discuss these things and try to find some common ground in dealing with it. Maybe at some point we have to get rid of some of these programs. I don't know. There's a discussion in Germany about young people and social media, that they should not have access to social media before the age of 16. I don't know if there's a similar debate here, but I think it's a debate we need to have, whether we like to or not.
Yeah, when I was preparing my questions yesterday, I was thinking about the concept of responsible trust. Mm-hmm. So how could we work on that within the university? So it's trust, but it's more than that. It's responsible trust. Well, I would like to move to another topic now. At the end, I would like to have a few minutes so you can have your questions. So if you think of them, so prepare for them. I would like to move to a broader topic, which is education itself and the role of liberal education. What do you think is the role of liberal educations in terms of building trust, not only in terms of the university, but in terms of society? At the end, the aim of liberal education is not to transmit knowledge to our students, but to cultivate judgment, the ability of reasoning, listening, etc. So in societies that are marked by polarization, that at least is our case right now, I think that this kind of education, it's more important. I think it becomes a democratic necessity in the sense that it enforces or it promotes discussion. It teaches the students that dialogue, it's not a competition, but a share, but a search of mutual understanding. And I think that in that sense, trust is both a precondition for that to work and the result of learning together. I think that in that sense also, liberal education trains us not only to think critically, but to coexist with difference, with people that think difference, with people that disagree with us. And to understand that this is a difference, that it's something that you have to engage with rather than to fear. Do you see that as a form of moral learning? Or
moral learning?
Or a kind of education in trust? I mean, liberal education as an education in trust, or education of how to...
Well, I think I agree with most of what you said. I think what the strength of the university is, you were talking about the polarized society, is that our research should be multi-perspective research, multi-perspectival. So we need in discussing our topics, I think we should allow for various perspectives to be taken seriously and to be discussed, at least discussed. That's why I said early on, it's not just people trusting or students trusting me, I have to trust them, because students bring various perspectives into the classroom, and they're all, maybe not all, but most of them are valuable and should be taken seriously. And this is something that I think this is one of the great strengths, I think, of research. That ideally, I know this is ideal, everyone has a stake or could have a stake in, let's say, forming an opinion on a research topic. Certainly within our disciplines, we don't do mostly math, right? We do sociology, philosophy, history, political science, anthropology, and these are disciplines that are not math. I mean, the results are often open to interpretation. We don't have one truth at the, to be reached at the end of all of our discussions. We try to, the progress in our disciplines is more difficult to assess. It's much more difficult to assess. But I think there is progress. There are certain standards of argument that you can and should not fall behind. So my point is, I think this is one thing that makes us attractive and that makes us, as we said at the beginning, trustworthy, because we are more integrative than polarized society, where for whatever reason, and we can study these reasons, and we do study these reasons, you have them and us, or us and them, and it's such an aggressive clash. The USA is just an extreme example, of course, of this, where people really seem to hate each other by now, and Trump openly says so, we all know this. But it's in all societies, even in Switzerland and in Germany, there is a lot of polarization. So here the university, I think, fares better, but I think it has to, as we said, has to be aware of certain risks. And one of the risks is it should not be, it should open, I mean, one of the risks is that it's seen as elitist, as just, oh, this is the smart ones, the studied ones, the PhDs, the full professors, they think they know they know better, or for the right-wing populists, they're just leftist wokeists. It's important, I think, to be aware of this threat of being seen that way, and to open up the university to some extent to the outside world. So not just be here on top of the hill, and Santiago is down there, but also go down there. And I know you have buildings in Santiago. I've seen them, and I was there. Fantastic. But it's important to take that seriously and to engage as much as you can with your means, and there are limits to that, with society and with as many groups within society as possible, and telling them what you do and why it's worthwhile what you do. And this, many scientists, this goes back to the person, the personal characteristics of persons are not ready for this. They don't want it, or they're not ready, they cannot do it, they have not learned it. You need to learn to talk in public, or on TV or on radio. I didn't learn it, and I had to learn it the hard way, you know. So this is, I think, important. Some people call some of this citizen science. I don't know if you've heard of this. Citizen science means that a lot of people out there are quite knowledgeable about many things. Like if you do feminist theory at a university, you talk about, let's say, women's role in society, maybe in a critical way, and that's good, you can do that, it's important research, certainly, but then again, you shouldn't pretend that you're the only expert about it. Women out there probably are experts in many respects when it comes to this topic. So engage with that, take that knowledge seriously, because some of science, I think, is in some respects too far away from this kind of broad knowledge that is there. Even in, you know, if you do, I don't know, agrarian law, or some, you know, maybe elusive subjects, your regular, I don't know, your regular person working out there in, you know, knows more about the land or the quality of the land than maybe you as a scientist. This has been shown, in fact, in some science research, that sometimes science is too far away from some of the subject it studies in terms of not taking seriously, you know, non-scientists' perspectives, citizens' perspectives, or even professionals' perspectives, let's say in the agrarian realm. So this is something that we, as a liberal institution, that's your question, have to be aware of. We should, and this is difficult. We should not stay aloof. We should not try to be elitist. We should be self-confident about what we know. I think, don't get me wrong. We don't have to belittle ourselves. We know we are experts in many respects. Sometimes very narrow, but still. And we have to tell people that we are, and that we are not, that we are well-intentioned. Yeah, certainly the critics we talked about earlier, we have to tell them, I don't want to kill your child by doing my vaccination research. On the contrary, I want to help you. I want your child to be healthier than it may be without vaccination. And many people don't seem to see this, and so we have to tell them and have to prove as much as we can that this is our mission and that we have good data supporting our position. But we have to communicate that, going back to the question of communication, and make it understandable to people outside, and so we have to enter this dialogue. So I think this is one task of what you call liberal education. Just a second thing, a short remark. I think what I like about also your university, I read the statement by Mr. Ibáñez, this plaque you have, saying don't just study economics, but there needs to be let's call it a wider frame to it, your core curriculum. I've seen the rooms here, the core courses or the core seminar rooms. What was a core seminar room? Yeah, this is a nice idea because we have the same in Lucerne. We have a program called Philosophy, Politics and Economics, PPE, a famous Oxford program that we created some years ago, which also shares the idea, and this is maybe true of a good liberal education, of not just developing expertise in one field of research. Economics, my colleagues from the economics department don't always like to hear this, I think needs a wider frame. It needs knowledge in political science and political theory and in philosophy. And this is what I would also consider to be part of liberal education. Because philosophy, it has its own, specializations and its own very narrow expertise. But we think, for example, about concepts such as trust. We think about what trust means, what it could be, what its implications are. Is it in danger? Is it threatened? And why so? And I think that's relevant to more disciplines than just philosophy. And this is something we can do as philosophers. We can broaden perspectives. It's not always welcome, again, not always welcome. Some people, or maybe some of your students don't like it, but believe me, it's worth it. And maybe at some later point you will come back to your Plato or Aristotle or Kant or Hegel readings and remember, oh, there was something important there. I didn't like it at the time, but it's a question that somehow is still relevant. And this is, now I do some PR for my discipline. it's amazing. Just imagine, I mean, in economics, you wouldn't read ideas that are 100 years old. In philosophy, you can read ideas that are 1,000 years old, 2,000 years old. This is strange, isn't it? Why is that possible? Well, I don't want to answer that now, but so I guess liberal education should be aware of these, of trying to embed disciplines such as economics into this, into a broader frame.
I don't know, I have more questions, but I don't know if you have questions or anyone would just raise your hand and just, you have one? Okay. Can you stand up so, you, yes.
Go ahead, yes.
Yeah.
You were saying that the process is important. I mean, in this political science or philosophy, that maybe the end point, like the result, is not as important as the progress or the argumentation. So do you think that maybe evaluating the progress or the process of making an essay, for example, might be a good way of mitigating the use of generative AI?
Where we were discussing this over dinner the other night, that maybe you should grade people's prompts, right? The quality of their prompts. I'm not ready to do it because I don't even use, I shouldn't say this aloud, so don't tell anybody, okay? I don't even use ChatGPT. Even as president of a university, I don't. But this may just be my personal problem. Maybe I should use it. But I think you're right that maybe we have to reevaluate. We as universities, as teachers, have to reevaluate the qualities that we want you to develop. And so a competent approach to AI may be important, whether we like it or not, yeah, for you and for evaluating your competencies, because evidently this will not go away and maybe you can turn it to helpful use. But here again, it all depends on you. It's easy, I think so far it's still pretty easy to have your whole essay written by AI without me noticing it, or with me finding it very difficult to notice it. So this is about honesty, mutual honesty, and I guess, again, this is something we cannot formally teach. It's about personalities, about your way of wanting to be a student, right? So this is this invisibility area that I was, I guess you are right. We are in the process of, or we should be in the process of maybe re-evaluating our very idea of how do we educate, how do we teach. And it's an open, I think we have not reached the final answer. It's clear. We don't, there's a lot of uncertainty because also AI is developing so rapidly. It's much quicker than we are. And that's a bit threatening, but again, it's as it is. And I wouldn't want to be a student actually nowadays. I'm very open about this. Again, I'm old school, I guess, but I imagine on the one hand you find it helpful to use AI. It's pretty cool. I mean, it writes text, it translates quickly, but I know and I assume that you are here because you want to learn something. You want to be, on your own. You want to develop your own judgmental, as you said, judgmental capacities and become a knowledgeable, responsible citizen. And I guess I imagine, and I would ask you this, don't you think that sometimes you yourself find it difficult to answer the question how to deal with AI? I imagine that this is a problem for not just for me, but also for you. Would you say so?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's between us. It's not just here. It's there. It's everywhere. And let's try to be not passive about it. And these are powerful companies, as we all know. And I think they should not set all rules for our ways of teaching. I think we should be courageous enough to regain some autonomy, as we talked about earlier, as institutions, as difficult as it is.
Is there another question? Okay.
mainly about duty and truth-seeking. I have
Duty and, sorry?
Truth-seeking and duty.
Truth-seeking, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Maybe I'm a little naive about it, but I think that all institutions, even universities overall, they have this strong duty to truth-seeking and knowledge. So maybe I tend to find a little difficult to say, I don't trust my teacher, I don't trust my university about it. In other way, I think that social epistemology, for instance, could say to us, we should blame this institution if they don't reach this goal. So I don't know what's your opinion about it.
Okay, social epistemology is a discipline within philosophy nowadays, an important one. It teaches us a lot of things. And I think what you're saying is science has been biased itself. I said at the beginning, I don't think that science is fully neutral. So I agree, we need to be aware of our own blind spots. And social epistemology has shown us, social epistemology means just that what we take knowledge to be is always influenced by social forces, by various social forces. And some of these forces have their own biases, and they can also disfigure some of the results. So this discipline within philosophy, which has been mainly established by feminist philosophy, very, very interesting, powerful feminist philosophy. Miranda Fricker is an example. This is important, and we learn a lot about it. But I think so this shows that science is not beyond controversy, beyond bias. But I think as scientists or as researchers, what does follow from that? I think we need to be aware of it, and as I said, open up ourselves and our institution to maybe more a wider plurality of views, so that, let's say, certain groups of people who have been discriminated, maybe even by science, by scientists, we all know that that exists and has existed, can develop a voice in shaping, let's say, the way certain topics in science are treated. So I take your criticism seriously, but I think what we can do is to be aware of this. As scientists, we can try to be as much aware of it as possible. We can change, when necessary, our approach to certain topics, broaden the perspective, take seriously that there's not one truth about certain matters, without becoming fully relativistic. I would not want to do that. I'm not a relativist in this sense. I think most topics allow at least for certain kinds of knowledge that you cannot deny at a certain point. Also, of course, social epistemology wants to produce results that are accepted. So they want this acceptance too by a wide audience. So I understand your skepticism, and it's justified. And sometimes the difficult task is to understand what kind of science criticism is relevant and what kind is not. Skepticism is, I think the sociologist Robert Merton once framed the phrase institutionalized skepticism. Science is institutionalized skepticism, which sounds nice and this is what you are getting at. It should be maybe more skeptical of itself and of its own biases and biases in its results. So this is understandable, but I think the question that is relevant today is how much skepticism do we want to develop internally and how much skepticism from outside do we want to accept? There's a whole discussion in philosophy concerning the question of what kind of skepticism is helpful and fruitful and what kind is not. Because there is, as it were, cheap skepticism or unjustified or unfounded skepticism. And it's an open debate in philosophy nowadays to what extent we have to take all kinds of skepticism seriously, or do we not need some kind of ability to distinguish, forms of skepticism and critique that we want to take seriously, that we need to take seriously, and forms that are not helpful. And there are philosophers who say every kind of skepticism could potentially be relevant. I would not go so far. I think there are, certainly among certain people, there are very, very, how shall I say, unfair forms or unfounded forms of critique that just because they sound critical, we cannot take seriously. Like very absurd views, you know, when people think the earth is flat. So let's say I believe it's not. So is this a legitimate kind of skepticism about my position? Or would you admit that, well, maybe we cannot really, given all we know, we cannot take this sort of statement seriously? So this is, I think, a very tricky question, because in principle we should be open to all kinds of critique and skepticism, but then there seem to be limits. And we have to somewhere draw the line and say, this sounds good, this sounds helpful, this doesn't. Maybe at some later stage we have to reevaluate. We should always be open to that. Maybe even sometimes absurd positions at some point have proven to be correct. There are many, you know, like, I'm talking too long, sorry. There's this famous example, you know, from Vienna, I think. You know, nowadays doctors wash their hands before they treat you, right? And this has not always been the case, you know this. There was some Austrian guy, I forgot his name, Semmelweis, maybe Semmelweis, yeah. He said, you know, in terms of germ theory, you have to wash your hands, otherwise these women, mostly women in childbed, die. And people thought this was totally absurd when he first introduced it. So we have to be, this is a thin line we're walking here, right? But I don't think the earth is flat, I have to admit.
I don't know if there, it's just that I want to do a follow-up question from this. It's what about humanities and social scientists in this discussion? Because you said sciences are not fully unbiased. Mm-hmm. What about humanities and social scientists? Where do they stand in this discussion?
Well, it's the same. I think we originate somewhere. Let me be personal here. I mean, when in my childhood, I never had the plan to become president of a university. My father died pretty early. My mother was alone with 3 children. It was a difficult situation. I was lucky enough in Germany at the time to have an educational system that allowed me to attend school, to graduate, to attend university. I had stipends and scholarships. I was very lucky. This, of course, shapes my views of the world. How should it not? So, like when in Switzerland, and this again, I'm sorry for saying this at a private institution, with tuitions and fees, I know, I'm quite sensitive about that, because maybe if all institutions in Germany, academic institutions, would have been privatized in this sense, I may not have studied at all because I lack the money. So I'm saying this, of course, is a bias, and of course it may also bias me in political ways, but it may also bias my interests in certain topics. So I wouldn't deny that. And Max Weber, you know, is the famous sociologist who said this is, the context of exploration, he calls it. It's legitimate. You should not deny that you have a certain interest in your topic, and that's always, there's always some personal element in it. So in that sense, it seems to be clear that humanities, certainly humanities, as other disciplines as well, are not fully neutral or objective in this sense. It's beyond that. I think we have standards, even in the humanities, and I mentioned this here. It's not that you can claim just anything. We have standards that you should not break or not take seriously, disrespect. And so in that sense, I think it's not anything goes. So we have to be aware of this background. There's an interesting text by a famous American philosopher of science, Naomi Oreskes. She's written a famous book, maybe you know it, about the influence of the tobacco industry in the 60s and 70s on not having cigarettes, on not accepting that smoking causes cancer. So she showed that science, and that's again an example of how science sometimes gets biased and how external funding creates risks. So a lot of scientists took the money and said things like smoking is not dangerous, or it's not a risk to your health. Now she's written a book, Why Trust Science? One of her latest books is just the question that we're discussing, why trust science? And one of her answers, and I don't think I agree with her, is again the values that are involved. We need to talk about values. How does science get trustworthy? She thinks through being more open about the values involved on the personal level and on the, let's say, on the institutional level in doing science. So what she does in this book, because she thinks that science will regain the trust it has lost among certain segments of the population only if scientists talk about their values in a very broad sense of value. I'm a liberal, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm conservative, I like animals, I have dogs, whatever. Whatever is important to you, she thinks that scientists should be more open about this and that this may create sort of an overlap with people who share these same values outside your institution. But this sounds nice, but I think it carries its risks, because if you stress values too much, then maybe it's quite easy to get into all these culture wars, as we now call them, and realize that people have very different values. So what makes you so confident that if you as scientists express your values on a broad level, that this makes you more trustworthy? Maybe for some, but not for others. So I think it's a risky suggestion. So I think what we need to do, we said this earlier, is to be open about our methods, about the processes. We need to open them as much as possible, but not pretend that anything goes and that just any position is of value. I think we should also allow ourselves to be critical of some statements out there in the world.
Well, Professor Hartmann, I think we've reached our time. Time has flown. Thank you very much for this conversation. It's been very interesting. I hope you also liked it. And I hope we can continue talking later.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.